Beloved friends, let us come together in a moment of stillness, not to acquire anything, not to change anything, not even to improve anything, but simply to recognize what already is. For in that recognition lies the entire secret of spiritual living. The world in which we appear to live is one of constant motion, thoughts racing, conditions shifting, fears arising, hopes fading, bodies changing, relationships forming and dissolving. And in all of this movement, we often ask, why does life seem so turbulent? Why do the same patterns appear again and again? Why do we meet the same fears, the same disappointments, the same sense of lack? The answer is not found in the events of our lives, nor in the people around us, nor in the circumstances that confront us. The answer is far more fundamental. It is this: all human suffering arises from one root, the belief that we are separate from the source of our being. This belief is subtle. It is rarely spoken. It may not even be consciously held, but it shapes every thought, every action, every feeling. It leads us to imagine that God is somewhere outside of us, that good is something to be pursued, that love must be earned, that supply must be secured, that safety must be defended. As long as we accept this belief in separation, even unconsciously, life becomes a continuous attempt to bridge a gap that does not exist. We strive, we pray for, we seek after, we fight for, we fear losing, all because we imagine ourselves to be apart from the very infinity that constitutes our life. Now let us pause and feel the truth. There is no separation between you and the divine presence. There never has been. There never can be. The tragedies of life, the conflicts, the frustrations, the repeated patterns, these are not punishments. They are not evidence of divine absence. They are the natural byproducts of living from a false premise. And no matter how sincerely we strive to mend the effects, nothing truly changes until we withdraw belief from that false premise. You see, the spiritual life does not begin with effort. It begins with recognition. Recognition of what? Recognition that the presence we call God is not distant, not apart, not outside. The presence is the very life that animates us, the very mind that thinks through us, the very soul that expresses as us. When this recognition dawns, even if only for a moment, something shifts in the deepest chamber of consciousness. Fear loosens its grip. The frantic search subsides. The burden of self-responsibility begins to melt away, for we begin to know, perhaps for the first time, that we are not alone in this universe. We are not isolated beings. We are not struggling creatures separated from our good. We are expressions of the infinite, living within the infinite, supported by the infinite. This is the foundation of our entire journey together. The only suffering in this world is the suffering born of forgetting our oneness with God, and the only healing is the simple remembrance of that truth. Let us hold this gently, as one would hold a delicate flower. Do not rush to understand. Do not force the mind to grasp it. Simply rest in the awareness that deep within you, beneath thought, beneath emotion, beneath fear, lies a presence that has never been touched by separation and never will be. This is the beginning. This is the doorway. This is the first step into a life lived from truth rather than illusion. Let us continue in this atmosphere of quiet awareness, for the truth we are approaching is not grasped by the intellect. It is felt. It is realized. It is recognized in the stillness of the heart. We have spoken of the belief in separation, that unconscious conviction that we stand apart from God, apart from our good, apart from the harmony of the universe. Now, I would have you see how deeply this belief governs the entire human experience. When a person believes himself to be a creature separate from his source, he immediately enters into a world of fear, not because fear is inherent in life, but because fear is inherent in the illusion of being an isolated self. Every step becomes an attempt to secure safety. Every desire becomes an attempt to find fulfillment. Every prayer becomes a plea to something believed to be elsewhere. In this state of consciousness, life becomes a continual journey of seeking, striving, defending, achieving, and reacting. Not because these activities are necessary in truth, but because they seem necessary when the premise is false. Let us look gently, honestly. If you believe good exists outside of you, you will chase it endlessly. If you believe love is something another person can give or withhold, you will cling to it fearfully. If you believe supply is something the world can grant or take away, you will labor anxiously without rest. If you believe health is a condition of the body, you will fight disease as if it were a power, exhausting yourself in the struggle. If you believe peace is found in circumstances, you will rearrange the world only to discover it cannot remain arranged. This entire structure of human life, the seeking, the striving, the fearing, the defending, is built on a single foundation: the belief that you are separate from your own source. Now hear this with the deepest listening of the soul. It is not the experiences of life that trouble you. It is the belief through which you interpret them. It is the premise from which you live. For the human mind sees through separation, thinks through separation, and interprets through separation. And so it draws conclusions that are never true. I am alone. I must protect myself. I must secure my good. I must earn love. I must pray hard to reach God. I must fear what threatens my existence. But the truth is simple. You are not alone. You have never been alone. Your good has never been separate from your being. Your peace has never depended on outer conditions. You do not need to reach God. You only need to recognize God where God has always been within. The world of appearances cannot convince you of this, for it is built on its own illusion. But in the quietness of contemplation, you begin to sense something deeper than appearance, something that whispers, "All that I am seeking, I already am. All that I fear losing was never mine to lose. All that I thought stood outside of me is in truth the fullness of my own being." This recognition is not an escape from the world. It is the correction of the world. For when the belief in separation dissolves, the outer experience reorganizes itself in harmony with spiritual truth. But before harmony can be felt outwardly, it must first be known inwardly. And that inner knowing begins with this simple observation: the human condition is not the cause of suffering, the belief in separation is. Let your heart take this in deeply. For until this is seen, one tries endlessly to fix effects. But once this is seen, one begins to dissolve the cause. This is the beginning of wisdom, the dawning of spiritual vision. Let us come again into stillness. For without stillness, truth cannot be felt. And without feeling the truth, the words remain only words. In this silence, let us turn our attention to the nature of God, not as tradition has described God, not as childhood teachings have imagined God, but as God is in experience. When we speak of God, we are not speaking of a being. We are not speaking of a power among other powers. We are not speaking of something remote, distant, or separate. God is not a deity to be reached. God is not a person to be persuaded. God is not a force to be used or invoked. God is presence, infinite, indivisible, ever-present. God is life, the very life that animates your being at this instant. God is love, not emotion, but the underlying nature of existence. God is spirit without boundary, without form, without opposite. When you hear the words, one presence, permit yourself to feel what that means. There is no other presence. There is nothing outside of God, nothing apart from God, nothing that can oppose God. When you hear one power, know that it means there is no second power, no power of evil, no power of disease, no power of lack, no power of fear, only one power expressing eternally in infinite form and infinite variety. The human mind, living under separation, imagines two powers, good and evil, health and disease, life and death, abundance and lack, safety and danger. But these opposites exist only in the realm of mental interpretation. They do not exist in the realm of spirit. Spirit knows nothing of opposition. Spirit is a seamless unity of being. Now listen gently. If God is truly one, then God cannot be both presence and absence, both love and wrath, both giver and withholder. God must be, in every moment, the fullness of its own nature. Just as the sun cannot shine and withhold light at the same time, the presence cannot express itself as good and as evil simultaneously. It remains itself always. Our experience of God appears to fluctuate, not because God changes, but because our awareness shifts. We drift into separation consciousness, and suddenly God feels distant. We return to oneness consciousness, and suddenly God is everywhere. But in truth, God has never moved, so let us rest in this. God is the life of your life, the breath of your breath, the consciousness by which you are conscious. God is the very ground of your being. This is why the mystics have always spoken of God as nearer than breathing, closer than hands and feet. Not because it is poetry, but because it is literal spiritual fact. You cannot be separate from that which is your own essence. You cannot be distant from the very life that sustains you. You cannot be apart from the one presence that fills all space, including the space you call yourself. When this realization dawns, even faintly, something shifts. Fear begins to dissolve, for fear depends upon the belief in another power. Anxiety begins to quiet, for anxiety depends upon the belief in distance. Loneliness begins to fade, for loneliness depends upon the belief in separation. Struggle begins to ease, for struggle depends upon the belief that good must be pursued. When we understand the nature of God as one presence, one power, we discover that we live not on the earth, but in God. We breathe not the air of the world, but the atmosphere of divine love. We exist not as fragile beings, but as expressions of the infinite. Let this truth settle into you, not quickly, not intellectually. Let it take root in the silent places of the soul. For as we come to know God aright, we begin to know ourselves aright. And as we know ourselves aright, the illusion of separation begins to dissolve naturally, quietly, gently. It is not effort. It is recognition. It is awakening to what has always been so. Now, let us turn inward once again and contemplate the nature of you. Not the you the world sees, not the personality, the name, the history, the body, or the mind, but the true self that exists beneath all appearances. For if God is one presence and one power, indivisible and infinite, then the question naturally arises, what are you? What is your place within this infinite one? Let us enter gently into this inquiry, for it is the heart of spiritual realization. The human sense of identity says, I am a separate being. I have my own life, my own mind, my own strength, my own fears, my own limitations. But this idea of a separate self is born of the same belief we have been exposing, the belief in separation. In truth, you are not a creature apart from God. You are not a fragment broken away from the whole. You are not a soul struggling to reach a distant divinity. You are the individualization of the one life itself. Just as a sunbeam is not separate from the sun, just as a wave is not separate from the ocean, you are not separate from the infinite presence that is God. The sunbeam does not possess its own light. It is the light of the sun expressing in individualized form. Likewise, you do not possess life. You are life expressing as a particular form, a particular identity, a particular point of consciousness. Look gently within and see if this resonates. The life you call mine is God's life, individualized. The consciousness you call my mind is God's consciousness appearing as your awareness. The love you feel is God's love, shining in a unique expression. The substance of your being is the very substance of God, invisible, spiritual, eternal. When you think of yourself as a limited human seeking God, you live under the shadow of separation. When you recognize yourself as the individualized expression of the One, you live in the freedom of sonship, not as an achievement, but as an eternal fact. Hear this gently. You cannot become divine. You cannot earn oneness. You cannot attain spiritual identity. You can only recognize what is already true. You are not on a journey toward God. You are on a journey of awakening to the truth that God is the life appearing as you. This is why the mystics of all ages have insisted that enlightenment is not an attainment but a revealing. It is the removal of a false belief, the belief that you are something other than the expression of the infinite. Once this belief begins to dissolve, the burden of life begins to lift. You no longer try to sustain your own existence. You rest in the knowing that the infinite sustains itself as you. You no longer try to direct life through will or effort. You discover that life unfolds through its own wisdom. You no longer fear loss or death, for what can threaten the eternal? What can diminish the infinite? What can separate you from the very presence that is your being? Feel the assurance that comes with this recognition. Feel the quiet dignity of knowing, I am not a separate self struggling through existence. I am the living activity of God expressed as individual being. But this knowledge is not to inflate the ego, for the ego cannot survive this truth. The ego is the belief in separation. When the truth of oneness dawns, the ego dissolves like a shadow before the sun. What remains is the true self. Humble because it knows it is not self-created. Strong because it knows it is not self-sustained. Peaceful because it rests in the realization that all good flows from within, never from without. Let us hold this truth tenderly within our hearts. You are the individualized expression of the one life. You are not separate from God, for God expresses as you. This realization is the beginning of spiritual transformation. It is the end of fear, the end of striving, the end of loneliness, and it is the doorway into the peace that passes understanding. Let us enter this section with deep stillness, for what we are about to consider reaches into the very structure of human experience. And, as always, we are not seeking to judge the human scene, nor to correct it by force. We are seeking to understand its nature, so that we may be free of its hypnotic influence. You have heard it said that the truth makes us free. But what is the truth that frees? It is the truth of oneness. And what is the illusion that binds? It is the illusion of separation. Now, let us see clearly how this illusion operates. When we believe ourselves to be separate beings, separate minds, separate lives, separate wills, the entire structure of our experience becomes fragmented. It cannot hold together in harmony, for its foundation is not truth but misconception. Consider this gently. If you believe your good is outside of you, you will live a life of searching. If you believe your safety is outside of you, you will live a life of fear. If you believe your peace is outside of you, you will live a life of conflict. If you believe your supply is outside of you, you will live a life of lack. If you believe your health is outside of you, you will live a life of vulnerability. If you believe your joy is outside of you, you will live a life of disappointment. None of these experiences are punishments. They are simply the inevitable outcome of living from a false premise. You see, the human picture does not break down because life is inherently difficult. It breaks down because consciousness is operating through the lens of separation. And whatever we see through that lens appears fractured. When you believe you are separate, then another person seems capable of threatening you. When you believe you are separate, then the world seems capable of withholding good from you. When you believe you are separate, then the body seems capable of betraying you. When you believe you are separate, then circumstances seem capable of overpowering you. But step back and see something deeper. There is no person, no world, no body, no circumstance that exists outside of the one presence. Everything you encounter is an appearance within the one infinite consciousness. The same consciousness that is expressing as you. So what appears as crisis is often nothing more than the crumbling of a structure that was never built on truth. What appears as loss is often the dissolution of a belief that could not sustain you. What appears as confusion is often the mind releasing its false premises so that clarity may enter. When life falls apart, it is not life that is falling apart. It is the illusion of separation revealing its own instability. We must understand this with compassion, for the human experience of suffering is not a sign of spiritual failure. It is the natural exhaustion of a belief system that was never aligned with reality. Once the premise shifts from separation to oneness, the outer experience reorganizes itself in harmony with truth. But the reorganization does not begin on the outside. It begins within. It begins when you recognize that your good has never been outside of you. It begins when you see that peace is not something to create, but something to recognize. It begins when you understand that supply is not earned, but expressed. It begins when you realize that health is not restored, but revealed. It begins when you accept that love is not acquired, but is the very nature of your being. Life breaks down only when consciousness is attempting to live from a premise that is not aligned with reality. And life harmonizes the moment consciousness returns to its source. This is why the spiritual path is not a journey of fixing, but of awakening. Not a journey of acquiring, but of recognizing. Not a journey of becoming, but of remembering. Remembering that you and the infinite are one. Remembering that the presence has never left you. Remembering that the one life is living you, breathing you, expressing as you. Let this remembrance soften your heart. Let it dissolve the fear that something is wrong with your life. Let it ease the pressure to manage every detail, to control every outcome. You are not here to sustain life. Life sustains you. You are not here to create your own good. Good flows from the infinite within. You are not here to fight conditions. Conditions change in response to the consciousness that beholds them. The problems of life do not arise because life is harsh. They arise because we have mistaken ourselves for something we are not. And in that mistaken identity, everything becomes fragile. But in the recognition of our true identity, everything becomes whole. Let us settle again into silence, for this section requires a receptive mind and a quiet heart. We are now approaching a pivotal turning point in the spiritual life, the moment when we consciously withdraw power from the appearances of the world. And until this is understood, spiritual progress cannot be sustained. What is an appearance? It is anything that seems to possess power apart from God. It is anything that seems capable of harming, disturbing, influencing, or controlling your life. It is anything that presents itself as having authority over your peace, health, supply, safety, or joy. But hear this gently. No appearance has power. It draws its entire seeming strength from one source, your belief in it. The moment belief is withdrawn, the moment the appearance is seen as appearance and not as power, the illusion collapses. Not because you fought it, not because you resisted it, not because you prayed it away, but because you stopped contributing belief to its existence. The world, as the human mind perceives it, is a world of appearances. Good appearances, bad appearances, pleasant appearances, fearful appearances, but all alike are appearances. Not one of them has substance or power of its own. Listen carefully. Once you see that God is one presence, one power, you must also recognize that any second power, whether it appears as illness, conflict, lack, accident, injustice, or fear, cannot be real. It can appear real. It can feel real. It can seem real to the senses, but it has no divine authority. No spiritual law sustains it. No reality lies behind it. It exists only as a hypnotic suggestion in the human mind. The shift, therefore, is not about changing the appearance. It is about withdrawing belief from it. You may look at the appearance and say gently, I see you. I acknowledge the form you've taken, but I do not accept you as power. I do not accept you as law. I do not accept you as reality. Only God is power. Only God is presence. Only God is law. And God is here. Then rest. Not in denial, not in affirmation, but in recognition. This is the beginning of healing. This is the beginning of freedom. This is the beginning of the dissolving of fear. Some ask, how do I withdraw belief? And the answer is simply by recognizing the one presence. The moment you recognize the infinite as the only life, the appearance automatically loses its borrowed strength. You do not have to push it away. You do not have to change it. You do not have to fix it. You do not have to improve it. You withdraw belief by seeing that only one power is functioning, and nothing else has any foundation in reality. Let us take examples gently. If you face illness, the shift is from this has power over me to God alone is the life of my being. Nothing else has authority. If you face lack, the shift is from something outside must supply me to all supply is the infinite expressing as fulfillment. If you face conflict, the shift is from this person or situation threatens my peace to peace is an inner activity of God. No external form can intrude upon it. If you face fear, the shift is from fear is a real force to fear is the absence of recognition. God alone is. Every spiritual breakthrough Every healing, every moment of grace arises from one simple movement, withdrawing power from the appearance and recognizing God as the only presence. This is why Jesus could look upon storms, disease, opposition, even death, and remain unmoved. Not because he denied the appearance, but because he did not grant it power. Joel taught this repeatedly. You cannot fight appearances. You cannot wrestle them into submission. The moment you resist them, you affirm their reality. But the moment you see them as shadows, as mental impressions without spiritual substance, you stand in the light of truth. This shift does not come through effort. It comes through awareness. It comes when you are still enough to feel that the presence within is the only reality. It comes when you are quiet enough to sense that nothing outside has ever determined your life. It comes when you are humble enough to stop trying to make God fix the world and instead recognize that God is the only world in which you truly live. Now the question arises, what happens to the appearance once belief is withdrawn? Sometimes it dissolves immediately, sometimes gradually, sometimes it remains, but loses its sting. Sometimes the form changes, and sometimes your perception changes. But the outcome is not your concern. Your concern is simply the recognition of truth. For once you withdraw power from appearances, you enter a new state of consciousness, one where nothing external can dominate you, nothing external can bless you, nothing external can define you. You begin to live from the inside out. You begin to walk through the world as one who knows the secret. Only God is. This is the great shift. This is the entrance into spiritual adulthood. This is the foundation for all deeper realization. Let us enter this next movement of truth with deep stillness. For the subject before us cannot be understood with the mind, nor approached through effort, nor attained by striving. Christ consciousness is not a goal. It is not an achievement. It is not a reward for purity, discipline, devotion, or practice. Christ consciousness is your natural state, the state of awareness that exists when the belief in separation dissolves. It is not something to reach. It is something to recognize. Let us begin here. There is only one consciousness, the divine, infinite consciousness that is God itself. This consciousness expresses as creation, appears as form, manifests as life, and individuates as you, not two consciousnesses, one divine and one human, but one consciousness appearing in infinite ways. Christ's consciousness, then, is the awareness of this truth. It is the recognition that the same spirit that animated Jesus is the spirit that animates you, not to exalt the human self, but to dissolve the human self in the realization of the one self. This realization does not occur through effort. Effort belongs to the mind. Christ consciousness belongs to the spirit. And no amount of human effort can reveal what already is. Christ consciousness awakens in moments of recognition, quiet, spontaneous, effortless recognition. When the soul becomes still enough to sense its own source. This is why Joel spoke so often of the click, that moment when something within opens. And you know, without words, without reasoning, that the presence is here, that the presence is you, that the presence is all. In such moments, fear dissolves, not because you conquered it, but because it has no place in oneness. Lack dissolves, not because you solved a problem, But because supply is understood to be infinite, flowing from the withinness of being, sickness loses its authority, not because the body changed, but because you recognize that the life of the body is the life of God. You see, Christ consciousness is not something to create. It is what remains when the false is released. It is the state that emerges when you stop identifying with the personality, the history, the fears, the desires, the memories. It is the awareness that I live, yet not I. The Christ, the one life, lives as me. This is not mystical poetry. It is spiritual fact. Let us say this clearly, and let the words sink deeply. Christ consciousness is the natural awareness of your true identity, beneath the layers of conditioning, belief, and fear. It is not added to you. It is uncovered. It does not come from practice, though practice prepares the ground. It does not come from study, though study purifies the perception. It does not come from devotion, though devotion quiets the heart. It comes from recognition of what has always been true. You cannot attain what you already are. You cannot become what is already your essence. You cannot reach what has never been separate. The task is not achievement. It is surrender. Not surrender of will, but surrender of illusion. Surrender of the belief that you live a life apart from God. Surrender of the belief that you must become better, purer, holier. Surrender of the belief that enlightenment lies in the future. It does not. It lies beneath every layer of the present moment. When Jesus said, I and the Father are one, he was not proclaiming a special status. He was announcing the truth of identity that awaits recognition in each soul. When he said, the kingdom of God is within you, he was pointing not to a place, but to a state of consciousness that is always accessible. When the mind grows quiet. When he said, you are the light of the world, he was speaking to the divine identity within all, not to a chosen few. This is Christ consciousness, awareness of the one life expressing as all life, not a doctrine, not a belief, not a philosophy, a direct realization. It is felt as peace, because peace is the nature of oneness. It is felt as love, because love is the nature of spirit. It is felt as freedom, because truth is the nature of being. And it is felt as silence, still, radiant, effortless silence, because the self does not need to assert itself. It simply is. As you rest more frequently in this realization, as you abide more consistently in the awareness of the presence, Christ consciousness reveals itself, not as a peak experience, but as a continuous undercurrent of your being. You find yourself moving through life differently, not reacting but observing, not judging but understanding, not grasping but allowing. For now, you see, the one life lives itself, and your role is simply to witness. This is Christ consciousness, not attainment, recognition, not effort, awareness, not becoming, being. As we enter this next unfolding of truth, let us rest deeply in the awareness that nothing we are about to explore is something we must produce or achieve. The fruits of realization do not come through effort. They appear naturally, quietly, as the outcome of awakened consciousness. Just as a tree does not strain to bear fruit, you do not strain to express the qualities of spirit. When the root is in the infinite, the fruit expresses effortlessly. So let us gently behold the fruits of Christ consciousness, not as goals to pursue, but as the natural radiance of a life lived from oneness. 1. The first fruit, peace that does not depend on conditions. When consciousness awakens to the presence within, peace arises not as a temporary state, not as relief from trouble, but as a steady undercurrent that persists regardless of appearances. This peace does not come because problems disappear. It comes because problems are no longer empowered. You begin to sense that you are held in something vaster than circumstance, that your life is rooted in a presence that cannot be shaken, cannot be threatened, cannot be diminished. In this peace, you find yourself no longer reacting to the world. The world continues to move, but its movements no longer dictate your inner state. You may walk through noise, yet remain inwardly silent. You may encounter conflict, yet remain inwardly still. You may face uncertainty, yet remain inwardly anchored. This is the peace Jesus spoke of when he said, "My peace I give unto you, not as the world gives." It is the peace of one who knows that only God is. 2. The second fruit, healing as the revelation of wholeness. When you recognize that God is the only life, the only presence, the only power, then the appearance of illness is seen for what it is. A shadow without substance, a belief without foundation. Healing occurs not because we change the body, but because we withdraw belief from the appearance. Joel taught that healing is never a matter of manipulating matter. It is always a matter of realizing truth. And what is the truth? That the life of the body is the life of God, and that life cannot be sick, cannot be broken, cannot be diminished. When this is seen, the body begins to conform to the consciousness beholding it. Sometimes the condition dissolves. Sometimes the form changes. Sometimes the body remains the same, but the fear surrounding it vanishes. And that is healing too. Healing is not always the disappearance of the appearance. Healing is the disappearance of fear, for fear is the only illness, and separation is the only cause. When the illusion of separation fades, wholeness reveals itself effortlessly. 3. The third fruit, effortless right action. As consciousness awakens, you discover that your life begins to unfold in harmony, without planning, without forcing, without strategizing. Right action arises naturally because you are no longer living from the personal mind, but from the infinite mind. This mind does not guess. It knows. It does not push. It moves. It does not calculate. It flows. You may find that you simply know what to do without thinking, that the right opportunities appear without seeking, that the correct decisions are made without struggle. You are guided not through voices, not through visions, but through inner quietness. You are moved not through pressure, not through urgency, but through gentle intuition. It feels as though life is happening through you, not by you. This is what Joel called living by grace. Grace is the activity of God, unobstructed by fear, desire, or personal will. When you are in harmony with grace, your actions become effortless because they are no longer yours. The infinite lives its own life as you. 4. The fourth fruit, love that needs nothing in return. Christ consciousness reveals a love that is not sentimental, not emotional, not dependent on behavior or circumstance. It is love that sees the divinity in all, even when the human personality obscures it. It is love that does not seek to change the other, but beholds the spiritual reality behind the appearance. It is love that recognizes there is only one life here, appearing as many forms. This love is not something you practice. It is something that flows naturally. Once the false self dissolves, it embraces without attachment, gives without exhaustion, forgives without effort. It is the love of the one recognizing itself in all. 5. The fifth fruit, freedom from the world's hypnosis. As awareness deepens, you discover that external conditions lose their power to bind you. You are no longer hypnotized by fear of the future, regret of the past, or pressure of the present. You become free, not because life becomes easier, but because you no longer seek salvation through the world. You see the world for what it is, a realm of appearances, ever shifting, ever changing, never stable, and you rest in what does not change, the presence within. This freedom is not rebellion. It is not escape. It is recognition that you live in the kingdom now, that heaven is a state of consciousness, that the world is seen more clearly when seen from the stillness of spirit. 6. The sixth fruit, a life of quiet joy. Joy arises not from excitement, but from realization. It comes not from achieving, but from being. It is gentle, steady, never overwhelming, never fading. It is the joy of knowing that nothing essential can ever be lost. It is the joy of discovering that the presence you sought is the presence you are. And this joy flows through your days as a soft radiance, a quiet assurance, a subtle light. This is the joy of Christ consciousness, the joy of oneness realized. These are the fruits of realization: peace, healing, right action, love, freedom, and quiet joy. They do not arrive as results. They blossom as recognition deepens. We do not create them. We witness them. We do not strive for them. We allow them. They are the natural expression of the one life, moving through the transparent soul. As we come to the close of this journey together, let us pause once more and enter the silence. For only in the silence can the truth we have explored take root in the depths of consciousness. Everything you have heard, everything that has stirred within you, everything that has awakened in your heart, all of it points to one simple revelation. God is the only life, that life is your life. And the recognition of that truth is the essence of spiritual realization. Nothing else is required of you. Nothing else is asked. You are not being called to master techniques, to perform rituals, to adhere to dogma, or to acquire knowledge. You are being called to remember that the presence you have sought is the presence that animates your being. To remember that the love you have longed for is the love that constitutes your nature. To remember that the peace you desire is the peace that arises when you rest in truth. This path is not a path of attainment. It is a path of awakening. It is the gradual, gentle dissolving of the belief in separation, the belief that life is outside of you, the belief that supply comes from the world, the belief that health is fragile, the belief that safety is uncertain, the belief that love is conditional, the belief that you are alone. These beliefs fall away, not because you fight them, but because you see through them, and what takes their place? A quiet knowing, I live in God, and God lives as me. This knowing becomes the foundation of your days, It becomes the atmosphere in which you walk. It becomes the silence beneath your thoughts, the peace beneath your activity, the love beneath your relationships. It becomes your way of being. There will still be appearances. There will still be challenges. There will still be moments when the old consciousness seeks to return. But now, the appearance has no power. The challenge has no authority. The old consciousness has no reality. Only God is. Let these words become a doorway through which you enter the life that is already yours, a life in which peace is natural, because your peace is God's peace, a life in which healing is natural, because your wholeness is God's wholeness, a life in which right action is natural, because your wisdom is God's wisdom, a life in which love is natural, because your nature is God's nature, a life lived not from the mind, but from the infinite within. Life will not become perfect. Life will become real. And in reality, there is no fear, no struggle, no separation. There is only the one presence shining as the light of your being. So let this be your practice, not effort, not striving, but remembrance. Each time fear arises, remember, there is only one power. Each time conflict appears, remember, there is only one presence. Each time lack tempts you, remember, all supply flows from within. Each time doubt whispers, remember, the infinite is my life. And each time you forget, return gently, lovingly to the truth. For the spiritual life is not the life of never forgetting. It is the life of always remembering again. Let us close in deep, deep stillness, knowing that the words have ended, but the presence remains. And it is in that presence that you live and move and have your being. You are not separate. You have never been separate. And now you know